For those people that know my story, I was raised in church. I believed in Jesus from the time I was 9 years old, knew all the stories, knew the right things to say, prayed the prayers, got baptized in every church baptistry we were ever a part of. And so I've always had a clear understanding of who Jesus is and what his role was supposed to be in my life. But it wasn't until I got to college that I actually gave God full control over every area of my life.
So I can remember from the very beginning of our marriage how we always had talked about giving God control of everything in our lives. That's a big part of Robbie's testimony about really coming to a point, the beginning of our marriage when he was in college, where he really chose to give God everything and not just certain things in his life. And so for us, that was a really big theme in our marriage and something that was huge that we always strive to do, even when it was difficult. But it's funny because looking back at the same time, we always had this idea of what our family would look like, and it was our idea. It wasn't God's idea or anybody else's idea other than our own. And we always talked about, maybe 2 or 3 kids, but nothing more than that, nothing less. This is how it's going to happen. And we talked constantly about control and giving God control and trusting him in every area of our life, yet at the same time having this really perfect idea of what we wanted our family to look like.
Throughout our journey, it's been interesting that it's always been a really easy thing for me to do, to give God control over my life, to give him control in my marriage, to give him control in our finances, even though those were things that I questioned at times. Actually making the step and taking the initial effort to give God control in those areas has always been a really easy thing. Giving God control over how we raise our kids, giving God control over where we're going to work and where we're going to go. That's always been a really easy thing for me to do. And recently I was challenged very specifically on giving God control in an area of my life that I didn't even know that I had maintained control over. Quite a few people from our church have been taking the pretty bold step of hosting orphans from overseas, particularly in the country of Ukraine. And so this past Christmas, we saw a ton of orphans come over and be a part of our church experience. And one family hosted a little girl, and they were advocating for this little girl to be adopted. And my wife kind of spotted her out of the corner of her eye on a Sunday morning at church. And I don't know what to tell you other than there was an instant connection. I had the chance of meeting this girl a couple of weeks later. She ended up coming over to our house and hanging out and playing with our kids. And it wasn't long before my wife and I were both looking at each other and asking the question, what are we supposed to do with this opportunity? It's very clear throughout the scriptures that God wants us to look after the widows and the orphans of the world. And here's a girl who desperately needs to be adopted, that is going to age out of the adoption process and doesn't have great chances of success in her current situation. And so this is something that was desperately necessary. And we were asking the question, man, what is it that God wants us to do here?
I can remember sitting in our living room and looking over at this girl, just hanging out with her family, and all of a sudden just having this wave of emotion come over me, not having any idea where it had come from, and kind of just being overwhelmed. And I think in that very moment, just thinking, this could be my daughter. And how huge and crazy of a thought that was to be experiencing was just insane. This was not our plan. This is not where we had planned to go in meeting her, but it was just something that God was stirring up in my heart.
If I'm being completely honest and transparent, when we first started having the adoption conversation, I wasn't a huge fan. Not because I was against adoption by any stretch of the imagination, but I just didn't think that this was our bag. Adopting a teenage girl from the Ukraine, for me, my idea of adoption was always adopt a little Asian baby or adopt a little African baby and be able to kind of carry that around as a badge of honor. Look at my cute little African baby or my cute little Asian baby. I know that sounds insanely terrible and stereotypical, but it was all about me. And so this idea of adopting a teenage girl that I didn't raise from the Ukraine sat really weird with me, and I just didn't wrap my brain around it at first. Over the course of the next couple weeks, my wife was challenging me just to pray about it, to spend some time seeking God and asking what it was that He wanted me to do rather than to accept my knee-jerk reaction. And after praying about it for several weeks, one of the things I became completely aware of was this reality that this adoption thing wasn't about me. It wasn't about us wanting more kids. It wasn't about us expanding our family because it's what we wanted to do. But it was about being the hands and feet of Jesus in the life of somebody who desperately needed it. It was about loving on somebody sacrificially. It was about making a difference in somebody else's life, not just making a difference in my life. And it became pretty clear that not only was God using this as a way to teach me and grab a hold of my heart, but he was using us as a family to minister and be his hands and feet in the lives of somebody else. So right after we had made the decision that we were going to pursue this adoption process, we knew this is what God wanted us to do. We rolled it out to some of our friends and family, and we're really excited about it. I remember sitting at home on a Monday night and hearing my wife yell my name from across the house, and I remember running towards the bathroom where she was yelling from. And as soon as I opened the bathroom door, she has her head buried, and she's holding out a pregnancy test.
I think for about a few weeks, I had been feeling a little strange, a little beaten down, a little extra tired, more tired than I normally was. And you know, I think as a woman of childbearing age, it's just natural to kind of think in the back of your mind when you start feeling that way, like, oh my gosh, could I be pregnant? And you don't ever really tell anybody or voice that usually. It's just kind of a thing that you think in your head. And I kind of try to push that behind me when I would think it. I was like, no, there's no way I can be pregnant. And so I would push that thought away, and then it would just come up again because I still felt bad. I still was feeling weird. And so finally, after a few weeks, I just decided, you know what? I'm going to go get a pregnancy test. I'm going to come home. I'm going to take it, and it's going to be negative, and then I won't have to think about this anymore. And so I remember just kind of like while I was at the grocery store one night with the kids getting stuff for dinner, I picked up a pregnancy test. I made sure the kids didn't see what I was getting because I didn't want to have that conversation with them. And coming home and just immediately running to the bathroom to take it, get it over with. And I remember looking at it and immediately seeing that it was positive, like right away, completely shocked. And in that moment, all I could do was yell, "Robbie!" from the bathroom. And he comes in there, and I don't even think I said anything. I just held it up and showed him. And he didn't really have anything to say either because we were both in complete shock. And I think my mind personally immediately went to, how is this going to affect the adoption? Because this was just something that God had made so clear for us so recently, and I just knew that's what he wanted us to do. So then throwing this in the mix too completely confused me, completely shocked me. We were done having kids, and so honestly, I was really shocked, and it was a struggle at first because I was extremely overwhelmed and had no clue how everything was going to play out.
So over the course of the next few days, I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't process this with anybody. I basically just got in my car every morning over the next several days and sulked and whined and complained to God about how he was punishing me, giving me all these children. I had been so faithful. We started this church, and we were going to adopt this kid, and we were doing everything right. Now here God was giving us another child. And I was even frustrated because we know people in our own church. We've got people on our own staff that are desperate to have more children, and biologically they're unable to do so naturally. And so we were sitting there thinking, God, what are you doing? We don't want another kid, and you're giving us one, yet there are people who are desperate for a child and you're not answering their prayer. How in the world does this jive with your love and grace and mercy in our lives? It just didn't make sense. And I remember even canceling some meetings with people who were coming to tell me about their situations and their struggles with God. And I told our assistant, I said, I can't even remotely take on those meetings right now. Because the reality was, if I had gotten together with people who were struggling with God, I would have joined in the bandwagon of whining and complaining, like, yeah, God, what in the world is up with him? What in the world is he doing in our lives? And I remember being so angry and frustrated. And then I sat down, finally, after a couple of weeks, I opened up to a pastor in our area, a fellow pastor in our area. And I just kind of walked him through the whole situation and told him, I said, I know this sounds lame. I know that I shouldn't be complaining about this. I know children are a gift from the Lord, but we're really struggling with this. I'm really struggling with this, and I just don't know how to respond. And he asked me this question, which changed everything for me. He said, what do you think God's doing? And I remember responding, I don't know what God is doing. If I knew what God was doing, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. I need some help. I need some guidance. And he said, no. What do you think God's doing in you? And in that moment, it clicked. I went all the way back to freshman year in college when I said, God, I'm going to give you control every part of my life. In that moment, I recognized that for the last several years, without even knowing it, I had been committing idolatry. And for those of you who are new to church or don't know what that term means, it means putting something else ahead of God in your life. And for me, I had put my desires for my family dynamic ahead of God's desires for my family dynamic in my life. And whenever you put anything in front of God, it's considered idolatry. And in that moment, I recognized that I'd given God control of my marriage. I'd given God control of the kids that I had. I'd given God control of our church and my work and all these other things. But I hadn't given God control of my future. I hadn't given God control of my destiny. I was still trying to build my own kingdom the way that I wanted it built. And God made it uber clear that the only way He could use me to lead our people to the next place that we're going, not only as a church, but to lead my family in the next place that we're going, was to be completely and utterly dependent on Him and surrendered to His leading and prompting in our life, no matter what that was. If that meant adopting a child, if that meant having another baby, we had to be completely surrendered. So over the last couple of months, that's where I'm at as your pastor. That's what God's been teaching me. Teaching me to give up control, even in the areas that I don't even think about or know about, giving up my desires for what He wants for my life. And you got to know, I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm still trying to wrap my brain around this. But if I have any encouragement to anybody else who's struggling with that, who just feels broken over a situation or a circumstance or a set of circumstances in your life, I want you to know that the only source and the only place of hope is when you actually give God control over that circumstance, because He's the only one big enough to overcome that circumstance. I have no idea how I'm going to raise 5 kids, particularly one that is 14 years old and one that is 4 months old. I have no idea how I'm going to do it, but I don't have to know. I've got hope. You know why? Because it's not about what I can do. It's about what God can do in and through me if I'm willing and surrendered to Him. And so that's my hope. That's my wife's hope. We want to be His hands and His feet. And I want to challenge you as a church, even this morning, to do the exact same thing. Because God will do unbelievable things in the lives of those who are completely and utterly surrendered.